All right, so if you are here today, you most likely have a problem with your organization's investing and advancing their data capabilities, or you are looking for a better way to enable your data-driven transformation efforts. In this track, I'm going to show you Pariveda's approach to value realization and our execution strategy that we have used with our clients to ensure that your data strategies and projects deliver actual value to your enterprise. Welcome to the value track of the modern data enterprise. My name is Ansley Galjour, and I'm a principal in Pariveda New York. We know that every function in an organization generates data that theoretically could be used across the organization. But we also know that without a value and data strategy and the infrastructure and governance that supports it, which is what you just learned from, data and data strategies stay stagnant or remain in silos. Understanding why organizations invest in modernizing their data capabilities can come down to some of the questions I have here under business value. What are the challenges that hold back innovation and prevents responses to key business questions? How can my organization transform and become a data-driven, scalable, and agile enterprise? And how can my organization empower my customers and drive business value? These questions typically stem from the following challenges and end up driving a call to action, such as data sets being heavily constrained by legacy applications, heavy reliance on manually intensive or non-standardized way of working, no single source of truth because of fragmented systems, inability to effectively support acquisition and integration activities, and lack of or limited progress in automation and innovation to enable predictive analytics and advanced technology. And honestly, candidly, in our unique situation today, there's even more stressors out there for stakeholders to make sure that large-scale investments, especially using state-of-the-art technologies, really make a meaningful impact and drive business value. Therefore, as we go through the content today, I want everyone to walk away motivated by our approach with an understanding of how our insights and methodology can help your organization successfully undertake and deliver data transformation efforts. Before we dive into how we think about value realization through data efforts, let's talk about some of the common pitfalls that should be avoided. Pariveda has seen clients experience these challenges when taking on data projects. Many organizations have the build it and they will come mentality. And we've seen a lot of clients fail to move past the POC phase or not having strong enough use cases because it lacked the ability to deliver value and realize outcomes quickly. Today, we know results need to come in days and weeks and not months. A really close colleague of mine who's a very powerful technology leader, she jokes that she's the worst nightmare to her product managers because she and her team are always fighting with the business to try to get things moving and try to get ideas going. Frustrations with her and her team happen because their ideas keep getting shot down from the business over and over. And then on the business side, the ideas that are brought to the technology teams are seen as not very innovative or just not a good use of the technology platforms they're building. So projects that have started have quickly died or really weren't even able to get off the ground. The business needs to show growth and cost savings, and the technology teams want to do the latest and greatest and build resilient systems and products. So we still are having this conversation of how do we make sure those two merge together. All of these cause data projects like building data lakes, machine learning capabilities to sometimes be dead on arrival. And without the defined capabilities and alignment between business, technology, and product, any initiative will risk an abrupt end. Data projects are not just IT projects. That's not a revolutionary statement. But any project needs to quantify the value and benefits to metrics and capabilities and identify meaningful organizational impacts to realize value. It is critical for the business and IT to partner in defining and identifying the correct use cases to deliver value. So let's start by defining the term use case. A use case is a discrete problem to solve. As I alluded to before, organizations face problems finding the proper use cases to execute. Sometimes they fall victim to the big shiny object fallacy or sometimes they're shut down because the business doesn't think they're going to have enough value, dollar sign, to equate to actually doing the effort. The data in a recent executive survey underscores what remains obvious to many, that even with progress in achieving measurable results, a vast majority of organizations, 73.4% to be exact, still experience challenges in adoption of big data and AI initiatives. Executives, technology, and business alike know that data, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, insert buzzword here, is the future. Though at the end of the day, executives and stakeholders like yourselves have to answer to the board, to shareholders, and be on the books for key performance indicators that get documented in annual reports. So for the, go back. So for the rest of the talk today, I'm going to walk through the process we follow at Pariveda with our customers to help them find the right opportunities, drive the proper partnership, and quickly determine if the opportunity is of real value or not. As we work through organizations to link use cases to business value opportunities, we look at the typical value creation components and map them to business capabilities and the data elements required in order to create a holistic picture. This helps create the value story executives need to see and understand in order to fully support investing in these types of initiatives. Some of the typical scenarios we see when companies take on these endeavors are the ability to predict customer and market demand, which can directly impact revenue growth and operating margin. Enable inventory visibility for working capital improvements, or being able to predict equipment failures and shutdowns to improve operational efficiencies. At the end of the day, no matter how exciting the idea, to continuously fund innovation, you must find the growth and cost savings to anchor on and define in the business case. So we know that there's a diverse audience here, and there's different people are in different roles, different breadths of industries, and I know that everyone probably has different concerns and things that probably keep popping up in everyone's head. But in working to define the appropriate use cases, it's important to understand the voice of the customer, which here can mean internal and external customers. It is our recommendation that regardless of where you sit, IT or business, you dedicate some level of effort to truly understand the voice of the customer and how addressing their challenges will benefit them and the organization. This is key in enabling appropriate level of organizational alignment that was required to ensure a successful delivery of your initiative and to understand what metrics and measurements will be used by the organization to realize value. So let's go into what the key components are of our value realization approach. The building blocks you see on the left, so to speak, the financial benefits such as order fulfillment processes, such as SG&A, which is supplies general administration, can be quantified as the financial benefits in a dollar sign. Non-financial benefits such as order fulfillment rates, improvements, reduction of manual processes, reduction of spreadsheets are non-financial benefits that can be quantified. At the foundation, organizational adoption ensures that the data capabilities enabled are being adopted by the end users and put into the business processes so they can be captured and measured. We then identify the specific metrics that we will measure and report on with these new data capabilities, which is what you see in the middle. And these are what gets measured when we put them into a production environment. To create confidence in the ability to realize value, a business case, capabilities benefits assessment, and an organizational adoption assessment defines the value realization tracking plan. With the value realization tracking plan, you will have the activities focused on working through and implementing those opportunities that are looking to move the business forward. Now, I'm going to go into how we at Pariveda work with our clients to create and enable those capabilities. Our approach to continuous value realization is through our unique execution framework. The focus is on these three main circles that provide information to move through the process at an independent pace. So let me walk through all those loops and arrows. So we start with the focus to ideate on use cases, to build a list that the organization agrees can be worked through. You can call it a queue, a backlog, priority log. It's the same thing. So with those use cases, we start experimenting on those capabilities to see what is feasible through research and learning with the data and the opportunity and the technologies we have. Ultimately, we want to get to something that is feasible through a prototype that is agreed on by the business and IT that at that time is seen as a valuable use case and good enough to move into production and triggers that value realization and change management plan to start to get created. So we want to quickly get to something that we can build, test, and run. And once in production, we leverage the data platform to capture metrics and enforce updates to those new business processes. The value gets measured, reported on, and realized. Reporting on the value, data insights are able to capture those value realizations and those organizational adoption metrics that then go into additional things that can be experimented and learned and possibly even identified as additional use cases to be identified, assessed, and prioritized. Experimenting to prove that value can be realized is a key component that differentiates our approach from any other data analytics methodology. At a more technical level, which is covered in the platform pillar of MDE, experimentation tooling selection is often an initial decision in the process. Experimentation covers both the technology and the process steps to take and prove out an idea. The plan will change a lot as you move through the process and introduce use cases into production and learn from them. Therefore, processes must be owned by individuals to change the way things work and to adapt what is realized. Industry is also usually a big factor about how fast something can be going from idea to actually productionalized. So manufacturing might be a little bit more rigid in how they introduce things to production versus e-commerce and retail. We're going into that first circle, and this is the sub-process of identify, assess, and prioritize. And it's generally done through a part of a workshop. During this phase, it is critical to have business decision makers and your IT stakeholders working alongside together and virtual workrooms put into place. We start with the identify step. In this step, we start with the end in sight by defining a strategic vision and goals, leveraging the voice of the customer and walking through the customer journey and the business processes to uncover pain points and opportunities. This allows people to start speaking the same language, business and technology people alike, and really understand how to link the available technology solutions to create a use case that supports your business process areas that can be ultimately tied to the business case at hand. And I just want to call out that you can have multiple use cases tied to a business case, which is perfectly fine, if not suggested. As we move to the assess step, we are going to take that list of generated use cases and leverage a quantitative model to evaluate the business impact and complexity for each use case opportunity. We bring our complexity framework that measures the technical and risk factors associated with the use case to assess how feasible it is to achieve it. On the business impact side, we have our client bring those to articulate the details of the processes and impacts that they are expecting to address. This continues the shared understanding between technology and business through collaboration and conversation. The scores across both these dimensions are then averaged to produce a business value and complexity score for each opportunity. Through our use case assessment, a medical supply company captured $100 million in revenue and also built trust with their customer base. In this example, we were brought into a medical supply company that generates multi-billion dollars in sales through their product portfolio that consists of over 100,000 SKUs. The challenge was their sales force was left to their own devices and created their own pricing and selling to the end customer. This resulted in an erosion of trust with their customer base and impacted customer loyalty. So by reducing that price variability, this company would be able to capture that additional $100 million in revenue and maintain customer trust. The solution proposed would be to add a capability to predict the prices based on volume, size of customer, size of opportunity, and other factors. From a complexity perspective, it was very straightforward. It was a regression algorithm. And as you can see on the far right with all the green, we didn't have really big issues with data or the statistical analysis needed to solve for it. What it did uncover was that the business needed to address impacts to their sales process. The medical company salespeople were commissioned based on the margin that they sell items, so the predicted price needed to be incorporated into the process as a reference rather than be dictated and adopted into the salesperson's selling mechanisms. This is a good example of where a technically feasible use case to realize top-line growth had the assessment uncover an operational impact that needed to be addressed ahead of time so that when it got into production, it would actually be adopted by the salespeople and wouldn't cause issues to how the business was run day to day. Once we've assessed all the use cases, we plot them according to the business impact and complexity. We want opportunities that will show that we're aligned with the strategic goals and provide the greatest impact to the business. This also brings awareness to use cases that should be completely avoided because the complexity is too high and business impact is too low. In a best case engagement, we'd map out the through lines to show incremental steps to achieve high value differentiated offerings. There might be a dependent use case that needs to happen first to get to a higher value use case. And so this shows the breadcrumbs on why an idea should or should not be done. It also helps telling a really compelling narrative to executives on how we see these progressing their business. It's also important to reassess the placement of these use cases after they get promoted to production to see if complexity or impacts have changed. Our specialized mechanism in ideation is called a concept card, and this is the way we articulate concept cards through minimizing barriers and enabling the organization to have meaningful conversations. The tool really resonates with business executives since it captures the value and also the organizational impacts associated with the use case. It can be easily modified to capture what your organization values most. We usually make some type of customized change based on who we're talking to. We actually have a client in ag tech that has adopted our concept card, and their data product and data science teams are actually using this to keep track and updating all of their use cases to work on. Now that we have our work log queued and prioritized, we want to go through an experimental phase. As we move to experiment and learn, the following are important aspects to keep in mind. We need all three aspects here: business understanding, data prep, model development and evaluation to complete an iteration, or what we call a research spike. Unlike typical software development, the result of the iteration or spike is only going to be as good as the data on hand or the business understanding and value that we're looking to realize. So while the technical teams are going to be doing the work here, it is really critical that the business stakeholders are involved in helping in conversations to what features and factors need to be talked about to implement the model that we're trying to move to. Iterating and explaining the findings and observations in these short durations bring together the business and technology stakeholders and sets the right expectations. At the end of this spike, remember this is an iteration, the team and the stakeholders, business and IT alike, will get together and be presented with the results, findings, and learnings from what we worked with the data. Ultimately, the team will make a recommendation based on a data-driven hypothesis. Usually this is accuracy, how accurate a model is at predicting or inferring something. And we get to a decision called the 4 Ps: promote, persevere, pivot, and pause. Pause is usually done when opportunities should not be pursued, usually because of lack of data or the wrong data. Pivot means that we're not seeing progress, but there's another mechanism that we can put into play, either finding new data or sometimes from a technology perspective, using a new algorithm or tool. Persevere just means that we need a little bit more time, usually another spike. We ultimately want to get to something that we see as promotable. And promote means that we see enough and have enough confidence in the model. It's not perfect, but there's good confidence there. And that approach can be pushed forward and operationalized. So we then got into build, test, and run. And at the technical solution level, we have entered traditional software development. We are not done with the work yet, though, because until we actually have value captures measured and realized, we really don't know how well it's being adopted. So this is where the rubber meets the road in a shared understanding in the technical solution and the change management activities needed to support and update these processes. And the standard operating procedures. When tracking against the value realization plan, usually on some sort of scheduled cadence, we can start to see if the evidence is there of what the benefits stated in the business case are starting to present themselves. So if we're looking at reducing yield or increasing net new users, that value realization plan starts gathering those and checking those off. And in the change management work stream, as we are enabling these capabilities, even before productionizing them, we need to make sure they are being adopted and used. Otherwise, you can limit the value that you expect to get, or they don't even use it all and there is no value. Some of the crucial activities to support this are execution of a good stakeholder engagement, the ability to identify the organizational impacts, and the implications, and ultimately training required to have people actually use this day to day and the sustained adoption of these new capabilities. So as a stakeholder, these three work streams will provide you a clear understanding of what will affect what will be affected the way you originally structured your organization, and ensure that the capabilities enabled improve the way that you run your business. Here's a quick reference to where our approach has worked for an enterprise client of ours. Situation was a well-known consumer electronics company, was in a very competitive market. They were doing well, but they knew they were leaving money on the table. And so they engaged Pariveda to work holistically across the organization, marketing, finance, ops, technology, to understand how to apply advanced analytics effectively to move that organization forward and gain a competitive advantage. What we did was a 6-week discovery phase to ideate, assess, and prioritize. And working with different lines of business leaders to identify those use cases, we ultimately came out with a discovery of 38 use cases and a strategic mapping for those use cases for forecasted business value. At the end of the end of this engagement, we produced this artifact that grouped the use cases by domain-defined categories. And we were able to show the dependencies and interdependencies and build that story that really resonated with stakeholders so that they knew that their investment would move the company to their future desired state. We were also able to calculate year-over-year financial benefits. So as I wrap up my portion of this content, I hope that I've emphasized that our goal as we work through our approach with our clients is to have them thinking in the affirmative, going from the unknown to known benefits and addressing challenges that will benefit the end customer and the organization. So again, the key in enabling an appropriate level of organizational alignment is to ensure a successful delivery that any new data-driven initiative is to understand the metrics and the measurements that will be used by the organization to realize value. As we wrap up this topic, I wanted to revisit some of the common challenges that organizations face when undergoing these types of initiatives. So we believe very strongly and encourage you to think about how this value-driven mentality can benefit your initiative while still effectively addressing the risks associated with these challenges. We want to understand, how does this provide prioritized opportunities that align between the business and IT? And how it provides an approach that can present what might work or what might not work to your organization through feedback loop mechanisms much earlier in the process so that you have the ability to maximize the value to be realized. We talked about in the beginning about the challenges to deriving value from data, and we believe that the value realization plan that we've just walked through is the right way to alleviate those concerns and to provide prioritized opportunities agreed upon by business and IT, and an approach that can present what might work and what might not work through feedback loops and the ability to capture and measure value that is real and applicable. This concludes my part of the value track of this portion of the webinar. I hope you found this content to be insightful and helpful as you embark or have embarked already in your data journey. And that you are walking away armed with the knowledge that we can help with your data-driven transformation efforts and effectively support your business and deliver tangible business outcomes. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ryan McFarland for his closing thoughts.
Thank you, Ansley, for covering the value pillar today. I do want to emphasize there is a Slido link in the chat for questions. I just have a couple of minutes to try to tie everything together that we talked about in the introduction and the value pillar, especially given that platform and governance tracks are also underway simultaneously. So a couple minutes on closing thoughts, but we definitely will have some time for questions. So highly encourage you to go into that Slido and ask us the toughest questions that are on your mind at this particular time. So, just a couple things here. The three pillars really show that by focusing on advancement and capability within a particular pillar, it actually provides an enabling function for the other pillars. So, for example, identifying the high value use case, which was a big theme in Ansley's presentation, that actually informs the platform architectural decisions that are made to build out the data platform. Similarly, by building out a data catalog within that platform, better governance can be enabled. By focusing on data stewardship and compliance within proper governance, analytic insights convey reality versus being skewed by data quality issues. We really now hope that you and your team can better understand the pillar interactions and how ultimately governance is enabled by platform technology, which together helps your organization realize the business value that Ansley discussed. So let's examine the maturity stages, because we've hammered the pillar message so far, and there are some stages here with uncontrolled, reactive, proactive, and resilient. And we do want to make some distinctions, between these stages. So very few Pariveda clients start in the uncontrolled stage across all three pillars. Remember, your MDE maturity is equivalent to the maturity of your weakest pillar. An uncontrolled stage should be one to quickly advance past. Very simply, definition is all that is required to be able to advance into the reactive stage. Having a defined enterprise data architecture, defined governance policies, a defined vision are some of the processes and artifacts that can help move an organization from uncontrolled and into reactive. Next. So now in the reactive stage, a lot of your data processing, some of your descriptive analytics, it'll still be accomplished leveraging legacy process and technology. However, you will be beginning the building of value through the execution of use cases sponsored and authorized by people with governing authority and building it out using modern data pipelines. The implementation approach reinforces maturity through leveraging increased platform capabilities, adoption of new experimental processes within your organization. This really signals that the maturity journey has begun for your organization. Now, in the proactive stage, we advance past simple execution mindset that characterizes reactive and into an improvement mindset that characterizes proactive. Here, we notice the first pillar overlaps in our approaches. Over time, the ideation process that led to prioritizing a particular use case for delivery has matured into regular cadence and sequence for continual value stream delivery. The implementation approach has matured to leverage the virtuous cycle of prior pipeline and platform investments. And finally, the governance challenge between control and innovation is balanced for the needs of the organization as a whole. The overlaps here show maturation. The crawl, walk, run metaphor we used signifies crawl in your reactive stage, moving into walk now in the proactive stage. And really, why walk when you can run? Unfortunately, few Pariveda clients, like they are in the uncontrolled stage, few are in the highest level of resilience stage. As continued improvements are made in the proactive stage, the organization starts to understand one unified modern data enterprise approach and really starts to run. You can see things like self-service capabilities that allow power users the ability to identify quote unquote moonshot ideas. Customer-facing data products start to deliver financial and strategic benefits. Overall, the organization relies on data to provide resiliency within its industry and for the benefit of its stakeholders, inclusive of their end customers. Next. Some of the takeaway questions that you can ask yourself and others in your organization relates to our 3 pillars. So if we think about this from a value perspective, are you aligned with each other? Experimenting and learning using analytical insights. Those are the first couple of questions. From a platform perspective, are you building an emergent architecture from purpose-driven use cases and not using red flags of fill the lake and other technology-focused priorities? And from a governance perspective, do you understand the value that is being realized as opposed to only the forecasted benefits at the investment stage? Stated even more simply, can you compare actuals to forecasts? So with that, Pariveda thanks you for attending today's MDE event. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you and other professionals as we continue on our collective journey. Please certainly reach out after this conference with questions and how we can help. And we are going to now go ahead and surface some of the questions that we've seen in the slide. So Ansley, one of the popular questions here are, what use cases typically deliver the most amount of value?
Hey, Ansley, I can jump in on this one if you want.
Sure, I was actually on mute, but go ahead, Ron.
Sorry. Okay, yeah. And if Ryan, if I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and kind of do a 2-for-1, if that's okay. So I think the first one, you kind of think about what is the total opportunity in whatever product you're trying to implement. And the reason it kind of blends into the second one is being able to measure the value, right? So that, as Ansley's kind of pointed out, that's critical in our opinion in having any use case, right? It has to be measurable, but that value doesn't necessarily have to be dollars and cents. And then the story that kind of comes to mind when I think of these 2 questions combined was that medical supply company. So the example that Ansley presented was a $100 million opportunity. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. And so applying something to pricing has a very broad impact, right? So it applies to every single product that they sell, but there's a huge opportunity there. So that identifying cases that have a lot of transactions or have a lot of, the product itself has a lot of total revenue, there's where you find your most value. However, this particular company, they didn't necessarily want to start there. So really the first project that we worked with them on in this space was around predicting ship dates. So they have manufacturers all over the world, and their customer service department was ultimately trying to find out, if a customer ordered something that was back ordered or was still in transit, the customer service representative, they came up with their own methodology to give the customer an estimate of when their product would arrive. And so our regression algorithm that we applied to that problem, granted, it doesn't have a dollars and cents measurable value, but we were measuring the accuracy of those ship date predictions. And ultimately, you could infer that out a couple of steps to get to a dollars and cents through customer satisfaction, and they had some other metrics that they would kind of infer out. But we were measuring that use case based on the accuracy of the ship date prediction sent to the customer, which then translated into, so the value there was building customer relationships, their trust in the company itself. And then once that was successfully deployed is when we moved to the larger, much more dollars and cents value use case.
Yep. I would say if I'm able to pile in a little bit also, I think this also comes down to where the organization falls in their maturity stage. If it's an organization that it's currently revenue focused, and then it's looking to optimize customer acquisition, retention, etc., or if it's an organization that it's cost focused, or organization that it's customer driven or value driven, the way that they would prioritize initiatives as well as the business challenges that they're trying to address will come into play. So being able to articulate and quantify the business challenge and the impact associated will help the organization as a whole to prioritize and focus on those cases that will then point to the greatest value and the dependencies that exist in order to achieve them.
Thank you very much for that, Stephanie. And I apologize as the moderator. I forgot to introduce my fellow value panelists, and Ron McLean, a principal in our Chicago office, and Stephanie David, a vice president in our Philadelphia office. So definitely appreciate you answering those questions. Ansley, I'm going to pose another question here to you. How important is it that the first use case my organization attempts delivers measurable value?
Sure, and I'm off mute, so I can actually answer this. It is critical. If the first use case doesn't have anything that the business side or the organization can grab onto, then they're not going to trust the process. They're not going to trust the decisions being made. So while there might be a really big emphasis to like, oh, we have this great new technology, it sounds like a great idea, it has to be tied to those metrics that we talked to before, and ultimately tied to something that the organization is benefiting from financially or non-financially. Because again, it comes down to, is the process trusted by the organization to get stuff done? And once it is, then you can keep just iterating and putting stuff on, and that's when you can start doing really cool things. So that's my quick answer to that question.
Thanks, Ansley. Another question that I see in the chat here, and Ron, I'd like you to take this one if you would. What are some examples of why you would pivot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we see it pretty regularly, I think, during these experimentation phases where, I'll rely on a couple of examples that I've seen with different customers. One was a forecasting model that we had built that was built. This is a moving company that was national, so we were trying to predict the number of, I think it was the number of pounds of things they were trying to move across the country, and the results were kind of middling. So we decided that there's a regionality to their business, so it makes sense to have those models be more regional than national. And so the pivot, as decided by the team at the end of one of the spikes, was let's take a look at the same approach, but at a regional model. And another example is in that the medical supply company, nearly the same pivot point, but we weren't seeing the results that we wanted, right? Based on the initial experimentation phase. And so we pivoted pretty quickly, I think it was during the second phase, to start dividing their product lineup into product categories and then building a model for each product category. Now it seems like a simple decision, but it did add some overhead of that decision implies that if this goes to production, now you're managing, hundreds of models instead of one. So there's an operational cost to that, but it was certainly worth the opportunity that existed for that particular example.
Excellent. Thanks, Ron. Another question we have here, Ansley, and Stephanie, I'd like you to chime in on this too. What is the typical duration for getting from idea to deployed to production?
So our experiences from a bunch of clients, we usually have very short ideation sessions. So going from an idea to that first experiment and learn, we recommend at least, 1 or 2 spikes, and those can be 1 to 2 weeks long. In my experience, 3 is usually the average. So from 6 weeks, you get from an idea to get to something that is promotable. And then depending on your software development lifecycle and your business processes, you then move it to production. So we've seen an average 1 to 3 months to get something from idea to production. And again, of course, it depends on what industry you're in, how rigorous and rigid your processes are in your business functionality, how many function points you're touching. But from that experimentation phase, like we're really good at saying what works, what doesn't work, and getting something to promotable quickly.
Thank you, Ansley. I would like to call attention, it is past the end time for today's conference. We are going to continue to answer 1 or 2 more questions, and you're welcome certainly to stay on and keep posing them. Questions that we do not address, we will address post-conference asynchronously. So you're welcome to drop. Very much thank you for coming. If you have other Zoom calls, which we all do, to get to. But we will continue to answer just a couple of more before we close down for today. So with that, how quickly have you seen a client move from uncontrolled to resilient, and what is the average? I will certainly take that. I haven't seen enough of them to actually be able to definitively average. It is a very long, it is a long journey. This is a multi-year journey. This is not something that you're going to be able to do in a 9-month type time frame. I think one of the misnomers and one of the common red flags we see in client organizations is not really following the MDE crawl, walk, and run. There's a perception that you can skip some steps. This is not something that you need to skip. There's another question about the unknown and unmet, and excellent for innovating on the status quo. We really are focused on the foundational pieces, because to get to that advanced world, you need to go ahead and traverse within these pillars effectively. So the larger the organization, the longer it's going to take to go from uncontrolled to resilient. But I think if everything went right in a reasonably sized organization, I've seen it a little bit over 2 years from just a personal anecdotal experience. But like I said, I don't know that I've seen it enough with which to define a moving average, if you will. Another question that we have here, I think we've covered most of these. How does our experimentation approach differ from the AWS data-driven everything approach? Ansley, would you like to take that one as perhaps our last question for?
Sure. And I guess whoever submitted this knew R means Pariveda. How does Pariveda's experimentation approach differ from the AWS data-driven approach? They are similar. And both processes have been developed through experiences with clients and what works and what doesn't work, to try to get to those high value solutions that are adopted. I would say our approach is different because we emphasize the same thing: experiment, failing fast, getting stuff out. Our approach does put in the specific ability to have a value realization tracking plan. So tying things to those use cases, having the metrics that we plan to impact, that then tied to those value levers that the organization is looking to move on. That is a differentiating approach. And obviously it's also an approach is only as good as the people that are using it and implementing it. And we like to say, small teams, really being able to understand both the technology and the business side is something that differentiates Pariveda in general. So being able to speak both those languages, so to speak, in our experimentation, in our technical tooling, in our business architecture approach helps with providing that extra layer of confidence that our clients are used to getting from at Pariveda. And Stephanie, did you want to add on anything to that?
I think you summarized it well. I think my only add to that is it's going to be based on our ability to bring together the notion of linking the strategic objectives of an organization to the value components whether they're financial value or operational value, and then tie it back to the capabilities around business process, because those are tied to the ability of an organization to meet specific KPIs and targets from an operational standpoint. And then, making sure that you have a good org adoption plan in place. Or is your organization using the capabilities that you've enabled? Because if you don't, then the chances to hit those targets that you've identified in your use case will be minimized, will be diminished, and returns will be diminished.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. And in true Pariveda fashion, we will not leave an orphan question in need of an answer. So we do have one left. And Ansley, I'd appreciate it if you could answer this. How do you ensure that your experimentation is in line with your data governance?
Easy answer is the team implementing the experimentation has to have some baseline understanding of your company or your organization's data governance plan. Are there regulatory concerns? Is there anything that should be off limits? Very common example is in data sets of gender or PII is there. Just that baseline understanding of what is off limits is really important. It's also probably suggested, and we like to do this in all of our workshops, is if there's a data governance steward, having them in the room as we're going through ideation, as we're going through design. Having that representative there makes sure, helps with alignment and making sure that nothing's getting missed with the technical implementation. The business is also aware of any limitations that there might be. So that's my quick answer.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ansley. And I will just remind everyone, we will follow up with a copy of the recordings. So if you wanted to peruse one of the other tracks, you will be able to. And certainly encourage you to reach out, continue the conversation as we collectively mature towards a modern data enterprise. Thank you all very much for coming today. Have a great rest of your day.